In the scorched summer of 1942, as the world teetered on the edge of abyss, a city on the Volga River became the anvil upon which the Nazi war machine would shatter. Stalingrad wasn't just bricks and mortar. It was a name, a taunt, a symbol, etched into the soul of Joseph Stalin himself. Adolf Hitler, drunk on the fumes of early victories, saw its capture not as strategy, but as destiny, a personal duel with the Soviet leader, a way to erase the man's legacy from the map. But in the rubble-strewn streets that followed, where shadows clung to every corner like vengeful spirits, it wasn't tanks or generals who whispered death. It was the snipers, silent hunters, born of desperation and the unyielding will to survive. They turned the Führer's boldest gamble into a graveyard of illusions. Imagine the air thick with the acrid bite of cordite and burning oil, the ground trembling under the weight of 1,000 boots. This was no open-field slaughter like the early days of Barbarossa. This was a labyrinth of ruin, where every doorway hid a trap, every rooftop a perch for judgment. The Battle of Stalingrad would claim over 1 million lives, Soviet and Axis alike, in a meat grinder of urban hell that lasted 199 days. But amid the chaos, a new breed of warrior emerged, men and women who didn't charge with bayonets fixed, but waited, patient as the Volga's slow current, for the flicker of a helmet in the gloom. Their rifles spoke in cracks of thunder, each bullet a verdict. And at the heart of this shadow war stood Vasily Z, a simple clerk from the Urals, turned legend, whose crosshairs would etch his name into the annals of defiance. To understand how these ghosts of the ruins came to haunt the Wehrmacht, we must rewind to the fevered mind of the man who set it all in motion. Adolf Hitler, the failed artist turned despot, had gambled everything on the Eastern Front. Operation Barbarossa, launched in June 1941 with 3 million men, the largest invasion in history, promised a swift conquest of the Soviet Union. "We have only to kick in the door," he boasted to his generals, "and the whole rotten structure will come crashing down." But the Red Army didn't crumble. Winter bit deep, supply lines stretched to breaking, and by early 1942, the Germans were stalled, their blitzkrieg a sputtering engine in the mud. Undeterred, Hitler recalibrated. His eyes turned south to the oil fields of the Caucasus, the black lifeblood that could fuel his Reich for years. But that was personal. The city, once Tsaritsyn, rechristened in 1925 to honor the steel-willed revolutionary who would become Stalin, mocked him from across the map. Capturing it would sever the Volga, the Soviet Union's vital artery for shipping oil and grain, and deliver a propaganda coup that would echo through Berlin's beer halls. "It is not a matter of conquering the city or not," Hitler declared in a July 1942 conference, his voice slicing through the humid air of his wolf's lair. "We must, and we will take it." Generals like Franz Halder warned of overextension, of splitting the Sixth Army under Friedrich Paulus from the drive on the Caucasus, but Hitler, ever the gambler, dismissed them. Operation Blue was born, a twin-pronged assault, one arm to the oil, the other to the city. "Hubris, thy name is Führer." As the sun climbed high over the steppe in late June, the panzers rolled. Hoth's 4th Panzer Army and List's Army Group A surged forward, dust clouds billowing like smoke signals of doom. Romanian, Italian, and Hungarian allies, equipped and uneasy, flanked the advance, their boots kicking up the dry earth of a land that seemed to swallow men whole. By mid-July, the Germans had breached the Don River line, encircling Soviet forces in brutal pockets. The Red Army reeled. Stalin, in the Kremlin, issued his infamous Order No. 227, not a step back. Panic gripped Moscow. Evacuations began. Factories dismantled overnight, shipped east on rattling trains. Meanwhile, in the fishing village of Yelena, nestled in the shadow of the Ural Mountains, a 27-year-old naval clerk named Vasily Grigorievich Zaitsev sharpened his pencil over ledgers of ammunition crates. Born in 1915 to a peasant family, Vasily had learned the rifle song from his grandfather, a Cossack hunter who taught him to stalk hares across frozen fields with nothing but a Mosin Nagant and patience. The forest doesn't forgive mistakes, the old man would rasp, his breath fogging the winter air. By 12, Vasily had downed his first wildebeest that had plagued their village for months. School followed, then the Navy, where he rose through the ranks, his sharp eyes earning him a reputation as the best shot in his unit. But war called him from the docks of the Pacific Fleet, pulling him west like a tide he couldn't resist. Zaitsev arrived in Stalingrad on September 22, 1942, just as the Luftwaffe's bombers turned the skyline to ash. He stepped off the train, or what was left of it, into a maelstrom. The city, a sprawling industrial hub of 600,000 souls, was already a corpse in the making. Factories like Tractor Plant and Red October belched smoke even in ruin. Their workers, men, women, boys, barricading doors with tractor parts and Molotov cocktails. The Volga, wide and muddy, ferried reinforcements under a hail of Stuka dive bombers, their sirens wailing like banshees. The earth shook, Zaitsev later recalled in his sparse memoirs, and the sky rained fire. But I thought only of the hunt. Commanding the Soviet 62nd Army was Lieutenant General Vasily Tmutov, a squat, pugnacious Siberian with a glare that could curdle milk. Appointed on September 12th, Chukov inherited a force clinging to the west bank of the Volga by its fingernail scraps of divisions, green recruits, and NKVD enforcers to shoot deserters. "We fight for our motherland, for our honor," he barked to his officers in a bombed-out headquarters, the walls trembling from nearby shells. "The Germans think we're broken. Show them the Russian soul." His orders were ruthless. Hug the enemy close, fight from the basements, make every meter a slaughterhouse. No retreats, no illusions of maneuver. This was attrition, pure and primal. Into this grinder came the snipers. Not as an afterthought, but as Chukovov's secret blade. The Soviets had honed their marksmanship since the 1930s, with sniper schools churning out White Death specialists, hunters trained to blend with snow or stone. In Stalingrad's rubble, they found their perfect canvas. German advances slowed to a crawl. A squad probing a factory block could lose half its men to a single, unseen shot. The snipers were our eyes in the dark, one Soviet private, Anatoly Mereshko, whispered years later. They made the fascists question every shadow. Women joined Lyudmila Pavlichenko, the Lady Death, from Odessa, had already tallied 309 kills before her sisters in arms, like Maria Demina, would add dozens more here. Their scopes cold against flushed cheeks. Zaitsev wasted no time. Assigned to the 284th Rifle Division, he scavenged a sniper scope from a wrecked Weyerhaeuser battered POO optic that turned the world into a tunnel of precision. His first outing was a reconnaissance along the Krasny Oktyabr steelworks, the air heavy with the tang of molten iron and decay. Crawling through sewer pipes choked with debris, he emerged in a shattered warehouse, the floor littered with spent casings like brass confetti. There, through a jagged hole in the wall, he spotted them. 3 German officers conferring over a map, their uniforms crisp amid the grime. The crosshairs danced-wind from the Volga, tugging at his sleeve. The distant thud of artillery, a metronome to his breath. He exhaled, squeezed. The crack split the din like a whip. The first officer crumpled, a neat hole blooming in his forehead. Before the echo faded, Zaitsev chambered another round. The second man spun, clutching his throat, gurgling wet surprise. The third bolted for cover, but Zaitsev tracked him. The rifles would warm against his shoulder. Another shot, and the man sprawled in the dust, his helmet rolling like a discarded toy. 3 kills in under a minute. Word spread like wildfire through the trenches. A new hunter had joined the pack, but Zaitsev wasn't alone in the shadows. Across the lines, the Germans unleashed their own ghosts veterans from the sniper schools of Zul. Men like Sepp Alarberger, who would claim over 250 kills on the Eastern Front. They prowled the ruins with carabiner 98 kiloseconds fitted with ZF-39 scopes, their grey greatcoats melting into the concrete haze. One such marksman, a Berliner named Heinrich Horroff, later confessed in a POW interrogation. Stalingrad was no man's land. You didn't fight the enemy. You fought the fear of him watching you. Yet the Soviets held the edge. Their pre-war doctrine emphasized camouflage and patience. The Germans, arrogant from Western campaigns, often exposed themselves in aggressive pushes. Snipers picked them off fissures first, to sow chaos, then machine gunners, sappers, anyone who dared show steel. As October bled into November, the battle calcified into a nightmare of inches. Paulus's 6th Army 300,000 strong, backed by 2,000 guns and 500 tanks, pounded the city from dawn to dusk. The Mamayev Kurgan, a modest hill overlooking the Volga, changed hands a dozen times. Its slopes, furrowed graves, pocked with shell craters. Soviet counterattacks clawed back factories like Pavlov's house, a single apartment block held by 24 men for 58 days against relentless assaults. We lived like rats, Sergeant Yakov Pavlov wrote, but rats with teeth. In these charnel houses, snipers thrived. Zaitsev, now with a spotter named Nikolai Ilyana, wiry totter, with eyes like polished obsidian, tallied kill after kill. They burrowed into lofts overlooking Mamayev, using periscopes fashioned from shattered glass to peer unseen. One dawn, as fog rolled off the river like a shroud, Zaitsev spotted a German sniper creeping along a rail line, his ghillie suit a patchwork of rags. The duel was brief. Elian glassed the range 280 meters, whispered adjustments for the chill wind. Zaitsev fired once. The German slumped, his rifle clattering into the weeds. 11 snipers down. Zaitsev notched on his stock that day. Each mark a tally of vengeance. The psychological toll mounted. German soldiers, hardened by France and Poland, whispered of Russian Teufel, Russian devils who struck without warning. Morale frayed. Patrols returned half-strength, haunted by the ghosts of comrades felled mid-stride. Chukov exploited it, forming sniper schools in the Volga's bomb shelters. Zaitsev taught there, his voice steady over the drip of water and distant booms. A sniper is not a killer. He is the land's memory, striking for those who can't. Under his guidance, dozens learned the art, the prone crawl, the breath hold, the art of becoming invisible. One pupil, a factory girl named Tanya Baramnik, would claim 80 kills before a mortar round silenced her forever. She had hands like a seamstress, Zaitsev mourned, but aimed like an avenger. Hitler, ensconced in his eastern redoubt, raged at the delays. "Where is my he thundered at briefings, pounding the table until naps tore. He sacked generals, diverted aircraft from the Caucasus, even ordered the Luftwaffe to bomb the city, anew turning it to powder finer than before. But the Volga held, a thin blue ribbon of hope, ferrying ammo and men under fire. Stalin, in turn, pinned his faith on Zhukov's grand design, Operation Uranus, a pincer to encircle the Germans. Whispers of it reached the front lines, fueling the defenders' fire. Yet, in the ruins, the sniper war escalated. Rumors swirled of a German master hunter dispatched to end Zatsever phantom named Major Erwin Kig, head of a Berlin sniper school, his scope said to have claimed hundreds, from Leningrad to Kiev. It was a tale born of propaganda, perhaps, with no records to confirm his boots ever touched Stalingrad's soil, but in the trenches, truth bent to survival. Zaitsev heard the murmurs from captured officers. "The Major comes for you, Rusky." He smiled grimly, oiling his Mauser. "Let him come. The shadows are mine." As winter's iron grip tightened, snow dusting the craters like funeral lace, the duel that would define legends began not with a shot, but with a sighting, a glint of glass in a tower, a shadow to deliberate in the factory haze. Zaitsev raised his rifle, heart steady as the Volga's flow. What happened next would shock both sides, turning whispers into roars across the front. A gloved hand adjusts a sniper's scope, frost etching the lens like cut to a close-up. Eyes narrowed against the wind, breath clouding in the sub-zero air. The crack of a rifle pierces the silence, followed by a muffled cry swallowed by the gale. Narration, voiceover, gravelly and intimate, as if recounting a fireside tale from the grave. And in that moment, as the glint caught his eye like a predator's fang in the half-light, Vasily Zaitsev knew the game had changed. It wasn't just another Wehrmacht scout or a careless machine gunner. This was a hunter, deliberate and unseen, mirroring his own patience from across a chasm of shattered steel beams. The tower loomed over the Red October factory district, a skeletal finger accusing the sky, its windows blown out like empty sockets. Zaitsev lowered his Mosinagant, the rifle's weight a familiar anchor in his gut, and signaled to Ilyan with a subtle tap of his boot. The air hung heavy, laced with a metallic tang of snow and gunpowder, as if the city itself held its breath. This wasn't the haphazard sniping of summer skirmishes, where targets presented themselves like gifts in the open. Winter had descended on Stalingrad like a shroud woven from barbed wire and bone, transforming the battlefield into a frozen diorama of death. Temperatures plummeted to -30°C, winds howling off the steppes like the wails of the fallen. The Sixth Army, Paulus's once proud host, huddled in cellars and gutted buildings, their breaths ragged plumes in the gloom. Rations dwindled to a scrap of bread and a sliver of horseflesh per day. Frostbite claimed fingers and toes faster than bullets. We were ghosts in our own skins. One German infantryman, Heinz Schmidt, scribbled in a frozen diary later found amid the ruins. The cold was the real enemy, knowing until you prayed for a Rusky shot to end it. For the snipers, though, the freeze was an Elia canvas of white that amplified every shadow, every misplaced bootprint in the snow. Zaitsev and Elian had claimed a perch in the bowels of a bombed-out grain elevator, its silo walls pocked with shrapnel like the hide of some ancient leviathan. From here, they overlooked the factory's skeletal yards, where twisted conveyor belts lay like the spines of beached whales. Elian, ever the quiet philosopher, sketched maps on scraps of cardboard, marking wind patterns and sight lines with a stub of pencil. "The city speaks Vasily," he'd murmur, his Tatar accent thickening in the chill. "Listen to the echoes, they tell where the enemy hides." That first exchange with the phantom sniper unfolded over hours, a ballet of feints and stillness that blurred into eternity. Zaitsev baited him with a mirrored shard, angling it to catch the sun and flash like a signal flare across the gap. There a twitch in the tower's upper story, a scope's gleam answering the challenge. Ilyan counted the beats. 1, 2, 3. The German fired, the bullet whining past to bury itself in the elevator's iron skin with a resonant thunk. Zaitsev didn't flinch. He'd shifted a fraction already, his body an extension of the stone. Now his turn. He chambered around, the bolts snick muffled by a rag, and exhaled slow. The shot rang out, clean and true, splintering the tower's frame. No body fell, no cry echoed, but the glint vanished, and in the snow below, a dark stain bloomed like an ink blot on vellum. 1-0 to the hunter from the Urals. Word of the duel rippled through the lines like a chill wind, fueling the myth that would outlive the men themselves. Soviet propagandists seized it, Pravda, splashing headlines of Zaitsev's shadow war to rally the homeland. In Moscow's factories, workers hammered rivets to posters of a steely-eyed marksman, his rifle a scythe against the fascist horde, but on the ground it was raw, more visceral. Chukov, chain-smoking in his command post, a damp cellar beneath the Univermag department store, summoned Zaitsev for a briefing. The general's face was a map of exhaustion, lines etched deep as Volga channels, but his eyes burned. "This king, if he exists," Chukov growled, stabbing a cigarette into an overflowing ashtray, "he's poisoned the well. My boys jump at their own shadows. End him, comrade, or we'll all be stalking ghosts by spring." Did Erwin King exist? Historians sift the archives like archaeologists in ash, finding fragments but no full skeleton. Declassified OKW records mention a sniper instructor from the Grossdeutschland division, a veteran of the Finnish Winter War named Kinnig, with a confirmed tally of 200 kills. But the evidence is circumstantial. A radio intercept of a Berlin operator querying King's status. A captured dispatch alluding to elite hunter deployed. Soviet accounts, laced with wartime fervor, paint him as a Teutonic spectre, his scope etched with notches for red heroes. Zaitsev himself, in post-war interviews, spoke of him not as myth but as flesh. He was real enough in the crosshairs, cold eyes, like a wolf's. Whether fact or fog of war, the legend served its purpose, turning individual dread into collective resolve. The duel stretched across days, a chess match played with lives as pawns. Zaitsev's team grew, a loose cadre of spotters and apprentices rotating through the elevator like ghosts at a vigil. There was young Pavel, a 19-year-old shepherd from the Don Cossack steppes, whose ears caught the faintest creak of boot leather over wind, and quiet Maria, a nurse-turned-sniper, her fingers nimble from bandaging wounds, now steady on the trigger. Together, they mapped the German's habits. He favored dawn approaches, skirting the rail yard under cover of mist, his ghillie suit a swirl of urban camouflage rags of Feldgrau, blended with concrete dust and snow. One twilight, as the sun bled crimson across the Volga, the trap sprang. Elian had rigged a decoy, a helmet perched on a stick, bobbing gently above a rubble parapet, mimicking a careless sentry. Zaitsev lay prone in a trench 50 meters back, his breath synced to the city's dying pulse, the distant clank of a tram rail, warped but defiant. The German took the bait, his form materializing like smoke coalescing, scope sweeping the bait. Elian whispered the range. 200 meters. Wind left to right, 5 knots. Zaitsev's world narrowed to the crosshair's embrace, the target's outline sharpening against the fading light. He fired. The crack echoed, and for a heartbeat, silence reigned. Then chaos. The German staggered, clutching his shoulder, blood staining the snow in a ragged arc. He didn't fold, didn't scream, but scrambled for cover, his rifle abandoned in the drift. Zaitsev rose, cat-silent, and advanced, Elian flanking with a PPSH submachine gun at the ready. They closed the gap under covering fire from a nearby MG nest, the air stitching with tracers like fireflies in hell. The wounded Manknig Orkin dragged himself into a shell crater, gasping wet defiance. Up close, he was unremarkable. Mid-40s face gaunt under a stubbled jaw, eyes blue as frozen steel. Du Ruski Teufel, he spat in accented German. Fumbling for a Luger, Zaitsev kicked it away. Binding the man's hands with wire scavenged from the rails, interrogation came swift. In the elevator's lee, under the flicker of a kerosene lamp, the prisoner called himself Heinz Dorwald, a staff sergeant from the 295th Infantry, but his gear told another tale. A custom ZF-39 scope, engraved with a Prussian eagle. A sniper's manual in his pack, dogged at sections on urban camouflage. Koenig sent me. He finally cracked, voice hoarse from the cold. The major, he watches from the grain silo across the river. Your death is his trophy. Lies or lure? Zaitsev didn't care. He stripped the man's rifle, a fine Mauser with a heavy barrel, and let Chukov's interrogators have him. But the warning lingered, a barb in the mind. Meanwhile, beyond the sniper's shadowed ballet, the battle raged in broader strokes, a symphony of suffering that dwarfed individual duels. Paulus, ensconced in his forward HQ commandeered villa on the city's outskirts, paced like a caged panther, his pince-nez fogging with frustrated breath. Intelligence reports painted a dire canvas. Soviet reinforcements swelling the 62nd Army's ranks to 50,000. Their T-34s probing flanks under the cover of night. The Luftwaffe, grounded by blizzards, delivered only sporadic hammer blows. Hitler, via encrypted teletype from Rastenburg, demanded the impossible, seized the Volga crossings at all costs. Stalingrad must fall by Christmas. Paulus complied with frontal assaults wave after wave crashing against Chukov's, hugging the enemy tactics. Where defenders fought from rooms away, grenades lobbed through mouse holes blasted in walls. The human cost was biblical. In the workers' villages south of the factories, house to house, fighting devolved into bayonet duels in snow-choked stairwells. Soviet sailor turned infantry from the Caspian flotilla, their blue-striped Telnyashka shirts vivid against the white, charged with naval cutlasses, screaming for the motherland. One such assault on October 25th recaptured a stretch of the Red October plant. But at the price of 80% casualties. We swam in blood that day, survivor Viktor Nekrasov recalled, his voice cracking in a 1960s interview. Not ours alone, theirs mixed in, turning the snow to slush. Civilians, too, became combatants. Old men and schoolgirls ferried ammo across the river en route, dodging 88mm shells that churned the water to froth. Snipers wove through this tapestry like threads of spider silk, invisible until they struck. Zaitsev's tally climbed 28, confirmed by mid-November, each kill a morale transfusion to the weary ranks. He trained more. His lessons etched in the damp walls of Chukov's sniper school. Sight your target, not with the eye, but the heart. Feel the wind as your own breath. Graduates fanned out to the tennis racket factory, where Anna Mikhailovna, a former librarian, picked off spotters from a clock tower, to the Strela match factory, where a one-eyed veteran named Ivan Drazdov claimed a dozen officers, his missus chalked up to the ghosts guiding my hand. The Germans countered with their own shadows. Elite units from the Derlewanger Brigade, convicts and poachers turned marksmen prowled the flanks. Their kills notched on rifle butts with grim tallies. One, a Bavarian called Der Jäger, haunted the Marmav-Kurgan, his perch, a foxhole ringed with frozen corpses as wind. Soviet assaults on the hill became charnel runs. Men cut down mid-charge, tumbling into communal graves that froze overnight. It was like hunting wolves in the Alps. Der Jäger bragged in a letter home. intercepted and burned by NKVD sensors. But these wolves howled back. As November deepened, the noose tightened not from bullets, but from the earth itself. Zhukov's Operation Uranus, long in gestation, stirred in the wings. Soviet armies massed on the Sixth Army's exposed flanks. Held tenuously by understrength Romanian divisions, boys from Bucharest and Cluj, armed with 1890s Mannlichers and prayers. Intelligence from Lucy's spy ring in Switzerland whispered the plan to Stalin: envelop Paulus, trap 250,000 men in a Kessel, a cauldron of doom. Zhukov's defenders, unaware of the grand design, fought on instinct. Their snipers, the vanguard of terror. Zaitsev's confrontation with the true king, if he existed, came on November 19th, the eve of Uranus. Fog blanketed the district, thick as battlefield smoke, muffling the rumble of distant guns. Elian had spotted the major's tell, a faint signal flare, green-tinted, arcing from the grain tower, a summons or a taunt. Zaitsev gathered his team, faces blackened with soot, rifles slung low. They crawled a kilometer through sewer outflows, emerging in a derelict tram depot where rusted cars stood like iron sentinels. From a cupola overlooking the tower, Zaitsev glanced the target, 400 meters, obscured by flurries, but there the silhouette, deliberate, scanning. The exchange was poetry in lead. Koenig fired first, his round, shattering brick inches from Zaitsev's ear, showering him with dust like grave soil. Zaitsev rolled, relocated, fired back, the bullet grazing the tower's ledge, eliciting a curse in German that carried on the wind. Minutes stretched to hours, shots traded like barbs in a lover's quarrel. Elian fell here, a stray ricochet catching him in the temple as he adjusted the spotter's mirror. "Go on, brother," he gasped, blood bubbling on his lips. "Finish the wolf." Zaitsev's vision blurred, rage a hot coal in his chest. He baited again, exposing a sleeve-red painted rag fluttering like a flag of defiance. Koenig bit. His scope flashed, committed. Zaitsev anticipated, leading the shot as if tracking a stag in the taiga. The crack split the fog, and this time the tower answered with silence. A body pitched forward, tumbling in slow arcs to the snow below, rifles skittering after like a broken limb. Zaitsev approached under cover, the team fanning out, hearts pounding thunder. The man was dead before he hit clean through the eye. The exit wound a ruin of bone and brain. In his pocket, a paybook. Oberleutnant Heinz Kig, Sniper School Zorsen. Not Erwin, but close enough a brother in blood. Zaitsev carved a notch, not for glory, but for Ilyan, and slipped away into the mist. The next dawn broke with the earth in uproar. At 0830 on November 19, 1942, 1,000 Soviet guns roared, shattering the winter hush. Operation Uranus unfolded, the 5th Tank Army and 21st Army crashing through Romanian lines north and south. Panzers churning snow to mud. Paulus's flanks crumbled like dry bread. By evening, the pincers met at Kalok, 60 kilometers west, sealing the trap. 290 Axis troops, German, Romanian, Italian, found themselves in Stalingrad, their tomb. Luftwaffe resupply flights, dubbed the Stalingrad airlift, began in farce. Ru-52s dropping frozen potatoes and axle grease instead of bread. Pilots dodging flak so thick it blackened the sky. In the city, jubilation mixed with dread. Zhukov's men, ribs showing through threadbare tunics, cheered from their foxholes as T-34s rumbled past. Snipers like Zaitsev turned outward now, picking off Luftwaffe crews scrambling from crashed transports. Their scopes trained on the steppe where relief columns dreamed of breaking through. "The noose is ours," Zaitsev confided to Maria over a shared cigarette, the glow brief as hope. But Paulus dithered, awaiting Hitler's orders, while Monstein's relief army operation Winter Tempest mustered, too late, too far, as December clawed in with blizzards that buried the dead alive. The Kessel shrank, a beast devouring its tail. Dysentery and typhus felled more than bullets. Horses boiled for soup, belts gnawed for salt. Snipers on both sides, adapted Soviet hunters targeting supply convoys, German diehards ambushing foraging parties. Zaitsev, promoted to captain, led sweeps through the encircled perimeter, his legend a beacon. "We didn't win with tanks," he later said, voice steady in grainy footage from a 1970s documentary. "We won with the will in our sights." But victory's shadow lengthened. Gring's airlift faltered, delivering a meager 100 tons daily against 700 needed. Hitler, delusional in his bunker, forbade surrender. Every man must fight to the last. Paulus, pale as parchment, drafted suicidal orders. Inside the cauldron, whispers of mutiny stirred officers, like Arthur Schmidt plotting coups, only to be quashed by fanatics. What emerged from this frozen inferno would redefine warfare, turning a city's ruins into the Reich's requiem, as the Red Army tightened the vice, and Zaitsev's crosshairs sought new shadows. One question haunted the snow. Could the hunters become the hunted, or would Stalingrad's ghosts claim the final toll? A sweeping aerial shot recreated in stark, monochrome snow-swept plains encircling a smoldering city. Tracer rounds arcing like fireflies in the perpetual twilight, cut to ground level. Emaciated figures in tattered greatcoats huddle around a sputtering fire. Faces hollowed by hunger, eyes darting to every shadow. The whine of Junkers' engines overhead, dropping meager sacks that burst on impact, scattering like false manna. A sniper's silhouette on a rooftop, rifle trained skyward, the wind whipping rags around his form. Voiceover, laced with the weariness of a survivor recounting nightmares. ... And as the echoes of that fatal shot faded into the blizzard's howl, Vasily Zaitsev allowed himself a rare moment to lean against the cold stone of the tram depot, the weight of his Mosinagant sagging like an old friend's arm across his shoulders. Eliane's body lay shrouded in a tarpaulin nearby, the snow already softening his outlines, as if the earth conspired to reclaim him gently. "Rest now," Brother Zaitsev murmured, his voice lost to the gale. "The shadows will keep watch." But there was no time for grief. The horizon trembled with the prelude to apocalypse. Far to the north and south, along the frozen Don and Chur rivers, the rumble built 1,000 Soviet artillery pieces, hidden in birch groves and ravines, their muzzles thirsting for the dawn. November 19, 1942, dawned under a leaden sky, the air so crisp it sliced the lungs like shattered glass. At precisely 8:50, the barrage erupted. A thunderclap that flattened the steppes and turned the Romanian trenches into charnel pits. Operation Uranus, Marshal Georgy Zhukov's masterstroke, uncoiled like a serpent, striking at the Sixth Army's vitals. The Soviet Fifth Tank Army, under Romanenko, 300 T-34s strong, smashed through the 3 Romanian corps north of the city, their diesel roars drowning the screams of defenders caught with bayonets fixed for parade. To the south, the 4th Mechanized Corps under Tanaskashin rolled over the 4 Romanian corps, exploiting gaps where horse-drawn carts and antique artillery offered no match for 76mm guns. It was over before it began. A Romanian lieutenant, Ion Sima, later testified at a post-war inquiry, his voice trembling. "Our lines were lines on paper ink against steel." Paulus, in his Gumrak airfield headquarters on the city's western fringe, stared at the wall map as red pins multiplied like blood cells in a fevered vein. Teletypes chattered frantic updates. flanks penetrated Trieste, immediate counterattack. But his reserves were Phantom's exhausted grenadiers from the urban meat grinder. Tanks, low on fuel, Luftwaffe squadrons, iced 2 runways. Hitler, roused from a midday nap at the Wolf's Lair, seized the phone to Berlin's operations room. "Hold at all costs," he bellowed, his Austrian lilt sharpening to a bark. "The Führer expects no less than victory." Yet, even as orders flew, the noose drew tight. By dusk, the Soviet pincers over 1,000 tanks and 13 infantry divisions linked at 40 kilometers west of Stalingrad, trapping 290,000 Axis souls in the Kessel, a cauldron of their own making. Inside the city, Chukov's 62nd Army erupted in ragged cheers, the sound carrying across the Volga like a benediction. Men who hadn't smiled in months grinned through frost-cracked lips, slapping backs in the gloom of basement redoubts. The fascists are in the pot now. A sergeant from the 13th Guards Division toasted with a swig from a canteen of watered kvass, and we're the cooks. But jubilation soured to grim resolve. The encirclement bought time, not triumph. German guns still thundered from the ruins, pinning Soviet crossings, while Paulus's forces, bolstered by Croatian and Italian scraps, clawed to consolidate their perimeter. Snipers, those eternal sentinels, adapted to the new geometry. Zaitsev's team shifted focus outward. Perchers relocated to the encirclement's ragged edge, shattered silos on the northern flats, where they glassed Romanian patrols stumbling through the snow, their foreign tongues a babel of fear. The air grew thicker with desperation. The Volga's west bank, now a fortified crescent under Soviet heels. Chukov, ever the bulldog, drilled his men in the cellars. Bayonet drills by candlelight. Lectures on the rat war of close-quarters savagery. "We bleed them dry," he rasped, his gravel voice echoing off damp walls. One drop at a time. Women of the 1077th Anti-Aircraft Regiment, rechristened Night Fighters, prowled the alleys with PP Desfinish. Submachine guns scavenged from the ice-picking off stragglers who ventured too far from cover. Among them was 19-year-old Vera Popova, a sniper whose tally would reach 87 before shrapnel claimed her leg. "I aimed for the ones who looked like they had families," she confided decades later, her eyes distant. To make the end quicker, maybe kinder. For the trapped, the Kessel was a slow strangulation. Paulus divided his forces into fortresses: Gumrak in the northwest, Gorodish to the north, the city center a hive of interconnected basements. Supplies, a cruel jest. Pre-war stockpiles in the city grain silos, half full. Oil depots, intact, were now contested ground. Fought over in grenade-tossing frays that left cellars slick with blood and chaff. Rations halved overnight, 200 grams of bread per man. Supplemented by Stalingrad soup, horsemeat boiled with boot leather and pine needles. Dysentery rioted through the ranks, latrines frozen solid, men squatting in the open under sniper fire. "We ate the dead when the horses ran out." A Grossdeutschland private admitted in a smuggled letter the words scratched in pencil on toilet paper. Not for hunger alone, for the warmth of something inside. Hitler, blind to the abyss, pinned salvation on the skies. Hermann Gring, the opulent Reichs, bloated on cognac and bravado, pledged his Luftwaffe, "I guarantee the 6th Army will be supplied from the air." At a November 21st conference, he boasted to Hitler of 500 tons, daily enough to sustain the pocket indefinitely. The Führer, eyes gleaming with messianic fire, nodded. "Then Stalingrad holds, the world will see." Thus began the Fliegerfeuer Stalingrad airlift, a folly etched in frost and flame. The first flights lumbered in on November 20th through -52, tonked just trimotors, their bellies gravid with crates. droning through flak-choked corridors from Tatsinskaya airfield, 200 miles southwest. Potomnik, the Kessel's makeshift hub, became a frenzy. Ground crews in fur-lined parkas, wrestling pallets under while Soviet Po-2 biplanes, the sewing machines of night harassments, titched the perimeter with machine gun runs. Initial holes were heroic. 300 tons on day one. Ammunition and fuel prioritized over food. Paulus radioed elation. Airlift success, morale restored. But the math mocked them. The pocket burned 700 tons daily. Deliveries peaked at 120, then slid. Blizzards grounded squadrons, icing carburetors. Soviet yaks pounced on stragglers, sending wrecks spiraling into the snow like fallen stars. Snipers turned skyward predators, their roles evolving in the siege's alchemy. Zaitsev, Ilyan's loss, a hollow ache in his chest, trained his scope on the aerial bridge. From a belfry in the ruined Stalingrad cathedral, its golden Madonna dome, a twisted crown, he tracked the transports, timing shots to the engine's vulnerable whine. Aim for the wings, not the men, he instructed his pupils, the wind off the Volga carrying his words like smoke. One frigid dawn, as a formation of He-111s lumbered low over Potomnik, Zaitsev's round found a fuel line. The bomber trailed black smoke, crashing in a fireball that lit the flats like a false sunrise. Crews spilled out, scrambling for cover only to meet Maria's fire from adjacent ruin, her shots precise as a seamstress's needle. For every plane they send, she notched on her stock. We ground to ghosts. The Germans answered in kind. Their remaining aces like Honzio or Kim Marseilla's successors in JE-27s, sweeping the Volga ferries with 20mm cannon. But attrition gnawed, fuel siphoned from wrecks, pilots flying until exhaustion claimed them mid-loop. On the ground, sniper duels migrated to the pocket's rim, where foraging parties clashed in the white wastes. A Hungarian unit, the 6th Light Division, sent marksmen to hunt Soviet scouts. One, a Budapest watchmaker named Laszlo Kovacs, claimed 5 kills from a snow burrow before a Soviet counter-sniper trained by Zaitsev himself silenced him with a headshot at 600 meters. The steppe was our dueling ground, Kovacs's comrade recalled in a Budapest memoir. Endless and unforgiving, December arrived as a white tyrant. Blizzards burying trenches under 2-meter drifts, temperatures plunging to -40. The Kessel shrank under Soviet probes. Operation Celestial, Zhukov's preparatory jabs, nipping at the flanks with ski troops and Katyusha rockets whose screams haunted German dreams. Chukov's army, now 100,000 strong with fresh divisions ferried across the ice-fringed Volga, pressed the urban core. The grain elevator, a monolithic tower of concrete and wheat, held by 40 Soviets against 200 attackers for weeks, its silos bullet-riddled but unbowed. We breathed dust and death. Defender Mikhail Panika said post-war coughing phantom grit. But the elevator stood, and so did we. Inside the cauldron, humanity frayed at the edges. Paulus, gaunt in his field, grey, drafted appeals to Berlin. Immediate relief, essential surrender, inevitable without. Hitler rebuffed him, promoting the general to field marshal on January 31st, a poisoned chalice, as no field marshal had ever capitulated. Officers plotted in whispers. Colonel Wilhelm Adam, Paulus's adjutant, penned secret memos for breakout, only to be overruled. Rank-and-file mutinies simmered, a company from the 44th Infantry refusing orders, mowed down by their own machine guns. Cannibalism crept in, unspoken taboos shattered by starvation. Frozen corpses, stripped, flesh boiled in helmets over dung fires. Snipers, insulated by their isolation, endured as the siege's grim poets. Zaitsev's group, now a dozen strong, rotated watchers from the sniper's nest, a fortified attic in the Red October's admin block, overlooking the factory's frozen yards. They sustained on scrounged tins of bully beef and melted snow, their kills a ledger of defiance. 15 Luftwaffe ground crew 1 week, a Romanian colonel the next, his fur-collared coat a splash of luxury in the waste. But the hunter became hunted. A German sniper cell, survivors of the 79th Infantry, infiltrated the lines disguised as deserters, claiming 3 of Zaitsev's apprentices in a midnight ambush. They smelled of sauerkraut and fear, survivor Pavel recounted, bandaging a grazed arm. We rooted them out by dawn. But the cost, always the cost. Monstein's relief effort, Operation Winter Tempest, launched December 12th. The dagger thrust from the southwest with the 6th Panzer Division's 200 Tigers and Panthers. Initial gains stunned the Soviets, recapturing Verkhneykamsky in a tank melee that lit the night with muzzle flashes. We tasted freedom. A Panzer Grenadier wired home, the snow red with Russian oil. But logistics betrayed them. 40 miles from the pocket, fuel exhausted, flanks harried by Vatutin's 2nd Air Army, Soviet reserves, the 2nd Guards Army counterpunched on December 23, shattering the spearhead. Monstein radioed Hitler. Breakthrough, impossible evacuate, Stalingrad. The reply, silence, then fury, no retreat, victory or Valhalla. As January 1943 clawed in, the airlift crumbled. Tatsinskaya fell to a Soviet paratroop raid on December 25, the last major base lost. Flights shifted to Morozovsk, 200 miles distant. Deliveries halved to 50 tons, bandages mislabeled as flour, aspirin crushed to powder. Potomnik's runway, a mud slick under snow, became a graveyard of shot-up junkers, their crews foraging for the wounded. Gring, ensconced in a Karen Hall feast, blamed the weather. Luftwaffe Chief Hans Jeschinek, racked by failure, put a bullet in his brain on January 19. Zaitsev, fate's capricious child, met his crucible on January 10. A routine sweep along the Rozoshka River hunting stragglers from a breached salient turned ambush. German machine guns chattered from a ravine, bullets whipping the snow like hornets. He dove for cover, Ilyan's ghost urging him on. But a splinter from a nearby shelper, haps from a Soviet barrage gone Astra, gouged his eye. Blood freezing in crimson icicles down his cheek. Blinded on one side, he crawled a kilometer to safety. Comrades dragging him through drifts that clawed like fingers of the grave. The shadows took my sight, he joked later. Bandaged in a Volga hospital ship, but not my aim. Evacuated east, his legend preceded him. Medals pinned in absentia. Pravda proclaiming Zaitsev's eye for the motherland. Chukov pressed the final vice, Operation Ring. Launched January 10 with 250,000 troops and 7,000 guns. The barrage, the heaviest since the war's dawn, flattened the perimeter. Earth fountains blooming in slow motion. German resistance splintered. Italian Bersaglieri, down to 10% strength, surrendered en masse, their alpine caps incongruous in the flats. By January 26, the Kessel fractured into two. One under General Strecker in the north, the other policies in the south. Teletypes to Berlin begged, fuel, food, permission to die with honor. Hitler, fight on. In the south, Hell's Heart, Paulus's HQ basement, beneath the Univermag Ruinsby, came a tomb of whispers. On January 30th, his birthday, he penned a final order. We stand as before. But the walls trembled, Soviet sappers blasting entry. On February 2nd, scouts from the 38th Motor Rifle Brigade breached the cellars. Finding the field marshal in a dental chair, pale as surrender's flag, uniform, immaculate. "I have no orders to fight further," he murmured to his captors, eyes averted. Straker followed hours later, the last pocket crumbling. 91,000 survivors marched into captivity, their boots crunching, frozen dead. Of them, only 5,000 lived to see 1945. The Volga, witness to the carnage, flowed on, its waters dark with the uncounted Stalingrad's toll, 1.1 million Soviet dead or wounded. 800 axis a butcher's bill that dwarfed Verdun, or the Somme. Snipers like Hitle, with 225 confirmed kills, emerged as icons. Their rifles, symbols of the asymmetric blade that carved Hitler's hubris. But glory masked the scar, a city erased, generations gutted. The steppe, a vast OSSUARY, as spring thawed the graves, and Zaitsev mended in Kubyshev. Polishing a new scope with his good eye, the world shifted. The Red Army rolled west, Kursk and Berlin beckoning. Yet, in quiet moments, survivors pondered the shadows. Had the hunters truly slain the beast, or merely awakened fiercer ones? The answer lay in the ruins, where echoes of shots still whispered through the wind. Archival colorized, footage rare and precious, of spring 1943. The Volga swelling with meltwater, carrying debris like the flotsam of forgotten dreams. Ruins stir with life. Soviet sappers in padded jackets prying rebar from concrete tombs. Women in kerchiefs sifting ash for heirlooms. Cut to a hospital ward in Kubyshev, a one-eyed man staring out a frost-rimed window. His bandaged face a mask of quiet fury. The camera pans to a map of Europe, red arrows reversing course, pushing west like a tide reclaiming the shore. Voiceover, reflective now, threaded with the gravity of lessons etched in blood. And in the hush that followed the last shot, as the echoes of Operation Ring reverberated through the thawing steppe, Stalingrad exhaled. The Univermag department store, once a bustling hive of pre-war finery, now yawned empty, a cavern of shattered glass and twisted girders, where Paulus had penned his final capitulation. Soviet soldiers, faces gaunt but eyes alight with a weary triumph, picked their way through the cellars, stepping over spent casings and the stiffened forms of the unburied. One private, a boy from Saratov, named Dmitry Kuznetsov, paused at a makeshift shrine, a German helmet inverted over a cross of bayoneted rifles, a faded photo of a Fräulein tucked inside. "They were men once," he muttered to his comrade, voice thick with the residue of months in the dark. "Just like us." But sentiment yielded to duty. The prisoners marched east in columns that snaked for miles, their grey ranks a river of defeat flowing toward the gulags of the Urals. Vasily, adrift in that hospital bed 500 miles east, traced the scar above his eye with a calloused thumb. The wound a puckered reminder of the shadows that had nearly claimed him. The doctors called it a miracle. Shrapnel had grazed the orbit without piercing the globe, leaving vision blurred but intact. "You'll hunt again, comrade captain," the surgeon assured him, clipping sutures with the snick of shears. Zaitsev nodded, but his mind wandered the ruins, replaying Elian's last breath, the tumble of Koenig's proxy from the tower, medals arrived by courier, the hero of the Soviet Union, gold star pinned to his pillow by a major from Chukov's staff. Pravda's correspondent lingered for an interview, scribbling furiously as Zaitsev spoke in measured tones. "It wasn't me alone. The city made us snipers, every crack, every shadow a teacher. We didn't fight for kills. We fought for the dawn after the night. That dawn broke slow over the motherland. Stalingrad's fall, officially the Battle of Stalingrad, though to those who bled there it was simply the fight, rippled outward like a stone in the Volga's depths. In Moscow, Stalin raised a glass in the Kremlin, his moustache twitching with uncharacteristic warmth, toasting Zhukov and Chukov in a rare display of magnanimity. The turning point, he declared to the Politburo, his Georgian accent rolling like distant thunder. Western allies, poring over decrypted Enigma intercepts, marveled at the scale. Churchill cabled Roosevelt, "The Russians have given the world the first gleam of hope." But for the Soviets, it was visceral, redemptioner salve for Barbarossa's wounds. Proof that the Red Army, once a stumbling giant, had learned to strike with the precision of a sniper's bolt. The legacy of the snipers wove deepest into that fabric. In the battle's official tally, they accounted for perhaps 10% of confirmed kills, thousands felled by those patient scopes amid the million lost. Yet their impact transcended numbers, a psychological scalpel carving doubt into the Wehrmacht's iron resolve. German after-action reports, declassified in the 1990s from Bundesarchiv vaults, brim with dread. Snipers demoralized patrols, halted advances, turned routine movements into calculated risks. One dispatch from the 389th Infantry Division, dated November 15, 1942, warned, enemy marksmen operate in cells, coordinated via field telephones buried in rubble, recommend flares and sweeps, but losses mount regardless. The tactic, honed in Stalingrad's crucible, became doctrine exported to Kursk's fields, Berlin's sewers, even the Pacific, by Lend-Lease observers who whispered of Russian ghosts to MacArthur's staff. Zaitsev returned to the front in May 1943. His eye mended enough for service, though headaches shadowed him like old ghosts. Assigned to the Second Guards Army under Moskalenko, he prowled the Donbas steppes, his Mosin-Nagant a constant companion. The war had evolved upon maneuvers now, with T-34s thundering in echelons, but snipers found niches, ambushing panzer crews as they bailed from smoking wrecks, silencing spotters who directed Stuka dives. Zaitsev's tally crept upward, notches added in the chalk dust of Ukrainian villages, but the fire dimmed. Stalingrad was the hunt, he confided to a fellow officer over Samagon in a liberated farmhouse. The air thick with the scent of blooming acacias. After, it was just duty. He mentored still, establishing sniper platoons that fanned out with the advancing salients, their ghillie suits woven from local thatch and mud. Women's snipers, those unsung avengers of the ruins, carried the flame further. Lyudmila Pavlichenko, already a legend with her 309 kills from Sevastopol, toured the US in 1942 as a goodwill ambassador, her quiet ferocity disarming White House skeptics. "I wear no makeup in war," she told Eleanor Roosevelt over tea, her uniform starched despite the shrapnel scars. "Just powder from the dead." In Stalingrad, her ilk Maria Demina, with 78 confirmed, Rosa Shanina, who would add 59 more by war's end, embodied the Soviet ethos, total war, where every hand held a weapon. Post-battle, they reintegrated uneasily. Demina returned to teaching in Leningrad, her classroom tales laced with the crack of scopes. While Shanina fell at East Prussia in 1945, her last letter home a plea for one more wolf before the peace. Across the lines, the German sniper tradition, once a point of pride, fractured under Stalingrad's weight. Veterans like Sepp Allerberger, who survived the East with 257 kills, carried the Kessel's chill in their bones. In his memoir In the Face of Death, published in 2000, Allerberger recounted a Potomnik patrol. The cold seeped in. But worse was the waiting, the knowledge that somewhere, in the white void, eyes watched. Stalingrad taught us fear, the kind that whispers you're already dead. The Wehrmacht's sniper schools at Zorsen adapted. emphasizing urban camouflage and spotter teams. But the eastern fronts toll over 80% of German casualties. They diluted the elite. By Normandy, their counterparts faced Allied hedgerows, but the Stalingrad playbook echoed in GR's manuals. Hunt the hunters. Hitler's gamble, that fateful thrust at the Volga, unraveled the Reich's skein. Resources squandered: 300,000 men, 500 tanks. The Luftwaffe's backbone left the austere a hollow legion for the summer campaigns. Kursk, in July 1943, the greatest tank clash in history, saw Soviet defenses bloodied at Stalingrad. Blunt Operation Citadel in a cauldron of their own, 6,000 tanks grinding in the mud. 1.5 million casualties shared like a poisoned chalice. Stalingrad was the hinge. Historian Anthony Beevor writes in his seminal Stalingrad, 1998. Drawing from diaries and declassified Stavka logs, Hitler lost the initiative there, and with it, the war. The Führer, sequestered in Rast, descended into rages, dismissing generals like Zeitzler for defeatism. His once sharp mind fogged by amphetamines and delusion. Paulus, the reluctant field marshal, endured a spectral afterlife. Paraded through Moscow's streets in April 1943, gaunt figure in ill-fitting greatcoat, he testified at the trial of the major war criminals. His voice a monotone litany of Hitler's folly. I advised against the encirclement, he stated flatly to Soviet prosecutors. The courtroom air heavy with tobacco and resentment. But orders were absolute. Exiled to Soviet captivity, he lectured at the Frunze Academy on mobile warfare, an ironic mentor to the victors, until his release in 1953, amid Cold War thaws. Back in Dresden, he faded into obscurity, dying in 1957 of amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, his grave unmarked until reunification unearthed it. He was a staff officer in a field commander's war. His son reflected in a 1980s interview, trapped between loyalty and logic. The human ledger of Stalingrad defies summation. A mosaic of loss too vast for ledgers. Soviet dead, 478,741 confirmed. Per modern Russian archives. Though whispers from the 1990s Glasnost era swell it to 1 million, when civilians join the count, Axis toll, 800,000, with 235,000 never accounted for. Their dog tags melted in mass pyres. The city itself, pre-war, jewel of boulevards and theaters, lay pulverized. Its 1,400 streets, a labyrinth of ghosts. Reconstruction began in 1943, under architect Lev Rudnev, but scars lingered. The Mamayev kurgan, pocked with funnels, became a mausoleum, its eternal flame fed by the Volga's waters. Pavlov's house, that stubborn apartment block, stands rebuilt as a museum. Its walls etched with the names of 24 defenders who held it like a talisman. Zaitsev's path mirrored the war's Arkiev's liberation in November 1943, where he picked off SS officers from the Dnieper's banks. The brutal house-to-house of Breslau in 1945, scopes trained on swastika banners fluttering in defeat. Wounded thrice more, he ended the European theatre as a major, his hero star joined by the Order of Lenin. Victory in May found him in Berlin. Rifle slung over rubble-strewn Unter Linden, the Reichstag, a smouldering pyre. The shadows lifted, he wrote in a letter to his sister, the ink smudged by rain, but I still hear them whispering. Peacetime claimed him gently, a counterpoint to the storm. Demobilized in 1945, Zaitsev returned to civilian life as a textile engineer in Kyiv. His hands, once steady on triggers, now guiding looms through the hum of reconstruction. Marriage followed in 1949 to Maria, a nurse from his hospital days, their union a quiet harbor. He lectured sporadically at sniper schools, his voice a gravelly cadence over chalkboards. Patience isn't waiting. It's becoming the land. The Cold War cast long shadows. Zaitsev eyed the West warily, a product of Stalin's forge, but he found solace in hunting, stalking deer in the Carpathians with a borrowed 7.62, the forest's husher bomb. Ill health stalked him in the 1970s, lungs scarred by Stalingrad's dust. The eye wound recurring in migraines that blurred the world to halos. Yet he endured, a fixture at veterans' reunions, where survivors swapped tales like sacred relics, the grain elevators stand, the airlifts frozen,